The holographic display wall behind Professor Vaeln's podium was showing Qorath at full scale, a rendered projection of 10 feet of deep forest green, shifting to jade at the geometric markings, pale silver eyes level with the second-tier seating, the midnight navy coat with its silver embroidery filling the entire left half of the display. Whoever had calibrated the projection had done so accurately and without mercy. The unnamed alien students in the upper rows of the lecture hall had spent the last 4 minutes finding reasons to look at something else. Several had developed a sudden interest in their notes. One had oriented its entire body toward the exit with a patience that suggested it was waiting for a socially acceptable moment to use it. The bioluminescent ceiling panels cast their cool blue-white wash across 200 seats of precise, studied silence. Professor Vaeln the Marathi stood at his podium in his floor-length emerald coat, the architectural collar rising in 2 pointed peaks behind his tall, elongated skull, the gold and silver threadwork embroidery catching the ceiling light across every seam, from collar to hem. 7.5 feet of deep cobalt violet skin over a skeleton that glowed white-blue at every joint, wrists, knuckles, the long column of his throat, the light-shifting warm amber at rest through the translucent surface. His very large copper-gold eyes with their silver-gray sclera moved across the lecture hall. The joint glow at his long middle finger, that extra-jointed finger, brightest of all, held perfectly still. "Qorath," Professor Vaeln said, in the voice of someone who had chosen this particular word with great care and was watching it land, "has not been assessed in 11 years. The Academy's position is that sufficient data does not yet exist to determine engagement parameters." He paused. The amber glow at his wrist deepened fractionally. "My position is that data must be generated. I am therefore offering full practical grade replacement to any student who enters the arena and produces an assessment outcome." His copper-gold eyes completed their sweep of the room. "I require 1 volunteer." The silence had texture. It pressed against the eardrums with the specific weight of 200 students simultaneously deciding that their academic records were, on reflection, adequate. In the 4th row, Dustin sat with his forearms resting on the desk surface and his deep navy eyes on the holographic projection of Qorath with the expression of a man running a very fast internal calculation. Dark chestnut hair swept cleanly back from his forehead, the scar through his left brow catching the ceiling light. His forest green jacket sat precisely across his broad shoulders, the gold double-breasted buttons aligned with the kind of accuracy that indicated this was a person who made decisions deliberately and lived with them carefully. He knew the Vaeln file. He had read it twice, which took approximately 8 minutes because it was 1 page, and the exercise had raised more questions than it resolved. His hand did not move. Beside him, Hazel looked up from her notes. She had a question. The question was about exam weighting specifically, whether the practical component counted for more than the written component or was distributed equally, because she had been tracking her written scores and the margin was tighter than she preferred, and she had been waiting for a reasonable moment to raise this for 11 weeks. She raised her hand. The silence became a different kind of silence entirely. Professor Vaeln's copper-gold eyes settled on her. The joint glow at his wrist surged from amber to a sharp, startled white. His very large eyes did not blink. The raised oval nostril slits on either side of his smooth face flared once, involuntarily. His thin, pale, silver-violet lips parted. "You," he said. "Does this replace the entire practical component, or just the primary assessment?" Hazel asked. "Because if it's the full replacement, I want to make sure I understand the full replacement," Professor Vaeln said, in the tone of a man answering a question that had arrived from a direction he had not been monitoring. "Perfect." Hazel lowered her hand and made a note. "Then I'll do it." In the upper rows, the student that had been angling toward the exit made its move. Nobody stopped it. Nobody was paying attention to anything except Hazel's pen moving across her notepad with the calm, administrative confidence of someone who had resolved a scheduling concern. Dustin looked at the side of her face. Then he looked at the holographic projection of Qorath, whose pale silver eyes were rendered at perfect scale directly above the 4th row. Then he looked at the side of Hazel's face again. The scar through his left brow did not move. His hand remained on the desk surface exactly where it had been when it had not raised itself, a fact that was becoming structurally significant to his afternoon. Professor Vaeln asked Hazel to remain. The other students filed past with the energy of people who had narrowly avoided something and were processing the specific relief of that experience. Nobody made eye contact with Hazel. Several made eye contact with each other, which communicated volumes without requiring language. In the empty lecture hall, Professor Vaeln descended from the podium and laid 11 documents on the desk in front of her. They were the complete Qorath incident reports, one per year for 11 years, each stamped with the Academy's formal seal, each redacted in a different way. Year 3 was redacted uniformly, everything below the header, blacked out in one clean rectangle. Year 6 had individual words removed, which was somehow worse. Year 9 had been redacted, and then the redactions had been partially removed and then reapplied, suggesting someone had changed their mind twice about what was recoverable. "I want you to understand," Professor Vaeln said, his long fingers the extra-jointed middle finger longest, its tip glowing a dim, careful amber arranged across the edge of the desk, "the full scope of what you have volunteered for." Hazel looked at the 11 documents. She picked up Year 3. She looked at the uniform black rectangle. She put it down and picked up Year 6. She examined the word gaps with the focused attention of someone reading a menu. "What's the equipment recommendation?" she asked. Professor Vaeln's joint glow at the wrist shifted to white, held, then returned to amber with the quality of something that had tried to spike and been overridden. "The equipment," he said carefully, "used in previous assessments is documented in each report. What did it help with?" A pause. "Nothing recoverable has been determined. So no recommendation." "No." He moved the middle finger. The glow at its extra joint tracked the motion. "The recommendation would be, and I want to be precise about this, that you reconsider." Hazel looked at the 11 documents arranged across the desk. She picked up Year 9 with its double reconsidered redactions and examined it for a moment. She set it back down, aligned with the others. "Does Qorath have any documented responses to human engagement specifically?" she asked. "Or is the sample too small?" The joint glow at Professor Vaeln's knuckles, wrists, and the long column of his cobalt violet throat all shifted simultaneously to a color that was not in his standard emotional range and would require new documentation. He looked at Hazel across the 11 reports, his thin, pale lips closed, opened, closed again. "The sample," he said at length, "is insufficient." "Right." Hazel stacked the reports neatly, slid them back toward him and stood. "I'll need a prep room." The prep room was cold and white-lit and smelled of equipment that had not been used for 11 years because nothing requiring it had been sanctioned. Dustin arrived 2 minutes after Hazel, having walked very quickly from the lecture hall corridor while maintaining an expression of someone who was walking at a normal pace and had simply arrived sooner than expected. He had the Vaeln file memorized. Both pages, the original page and the question mark page that someone had added separately, which technically made it 2 pages, though the Academy's index still listed it as 1. He began talking the moment he cleared the door. "Vaeln biology," he said, moving to the weapons rack with the precision of someone who had decided that being helpful was the one productive option available to him, "is almost entirely undocumented. But from the observation data, there are 3 things we know with reasonable confidence." He pulled a piece of equipment from the rack, checked it, handed it to Hazel. "First, the geometric markings on the skin are denser at the joints, and the data suggests they're sensory rather than structural, which means impacts near the marking concentrations are going to register differently than—" "Can you write this down?" Hazel said, putting the chest guard on backwards. Dustin turned from the rack. He looked at the chest guard. He crossed to her, reversed it, refastened it efficiently, and returned to the rack without breaking his sentence. "Registered differently than standard impact points. Second, the subsonic resonance is biological, not voluntary, and the frequency shifts with engagement state. So if the pitch drops during contact, that means he passed her a secondary piece of equipment, watched her attach it to the wrong location, detached it, reattached it correctly. That means the engagement state is de-escalating, which sounds positive but in the data correlates with the transition to a second phase that the reports describe, but don't." He stopped. He looked at her. She was writing in her notebook. "What are you writing?" "Third thing," Hazel said. "I haven't said the third thing. You said there were 3 things. I'm leaving space for it." Dustin stood with a piece of equipment in each hand and the navy-eyed expression of a man recalibrating. "The third thing," he said, "is do not under any circumstances move toward him. Every incident report, redacted or not, shows the same initiation point. Movement toward Qorath. Don't move toward him. Let him set the distance." "Noted," Hazel said. She closed her notebook and looked at herself in the mirror. The chest guard was correctly oriented. The secondary equipment was correctly positioned. She looked competent, which Dustin found simultaneously reassuring and structurally insufficient given the specific circumstances. Hazel, he set the equipment down on the bench. His voice landed differently, not the rapid, tactical briefing voice. The other one, lower and more considered, the voice of someone who had stayed in his seat when his hand should have moved, and was going to be carrying that for a while. I should have. You read the file twice, she said to his reflection in the mirror. I know you did. You have the look of someone who read a one-page document twice. He was quiet for a moment. It doesn't recommend itself as a voluntary activity. Neither does failing the practical component. She picked up her notebook and turned from the mirror. She looked at him directly, the sharp green eyes, the auburn strands escaping the chignon, the silver clasp pin at her throat catching the cold white light. Take good notes up on the observation deck. Your written component could genuinely use the primary source data. She walked out. Dustin stood in the prep room beside the weapons rack with the expression of a man whose internal list had been reorganized by someone who had not consulted him about the new order. He picked up his notebook from the bench. He followed her, because the alternative was staying in the prep room being unhelpful, which was not an option he was prepared to exercise twice in one afternoon. The observation deck sat above the arena in harsh overhead light, with the transparent steel barrier between the gallery and the 80-meter drop to the sand below. Sail the Sorvith stood at the barrier's left edge, 6 feet of rose gold to peach gradient skin, the electric blue branching lines at her temples running faster than their resting rhythm, her platinum white hair with its blue-tipped ends drifting at her shoulders. Her large silver-white eyes with their electric blue pulse rings were fixed on the arena gate below. The small sensing digit between her thumb and forefinger discharged a spark against the transparent steel. She moved her hand. It discharged again. Professor Vaeln stood at the center of the barrier with a formal narration document open in his long-fingered hands, a standard Academy assessment record designed for exactly this scenario, last used 11 years ago and not completed. The joint glow at his wrists held amber. His copper-gold eyes were on the gate. He had his formal language prepared. Assessment record for practical engagement student designation, human cohort, 3rd year. He stopped. The joint glow at his knuckles went briefly white. Her name is Hazel. I know her name, Sale said. A spark discharged from the sensing digit against the transfer steel. I have been in the same cohort as her for 3 years. I know her name. I am narrating formally. You said her name. The formal record will reflect. Professor Vaeln stopped. Below, the arena gate was opening. The joint glow at every visible point of his cobalt violet skin pulsed amber, white, amber, and settled somewhere between the two that was not a documented state. His thin lips closed. Hazel walked through the gate onto the sand, her crimson jacket catching the overhead beam, her notebook in her hand, her boots leaving clean prints across the arena floor as she moved forward into the light. At the far end of the arena, in the shadow beyond the beam's reach, something moved. Not slowly, not with any of the patient, unhurried quality that 11 years of observation data had consistently recorded. Qorath moved the way the incident report's redacted sections implied, and the unredacted sections declined to specify 10 feet of deep forest green and geometric markings and silver-white hair, the midnight navy coat sweeping behind him, the pale silver eyes fixed on the figure in the crimson jacket with a focused, accelerating attention that the vital sign monitors registered in amber numbers, jumping from their baseline in a single sharp climb. He was already moving. On the observation deck, Professor Vaeln's formal narration document dropped exactly 4 inches before his long fingers caught it. The joint glow at every point on his body surged full white simultaneously. Sael's sensing digit discharged against the transparent steel hard enough to leave a mark. Below, Hazel looked up from her notebook at 10 feet of Verilus crossing 80 meters of arena sand toward her, at a pace that made the baseline reading look like a different organism entirely. And she did the one thing Dustin had specifically, clearly, and with emphasis told her not to do. She walked toward him. Qorath hit her like a wall that had decided to relocate. Not the shoulder, not the full chest. The glancing edge of his forward momentum caught her left side as she stepped, and the result was that Hazel left the sand entirely for approximately 1.5 meters before returning to it on her right hip, with an impact that the arena acoustics recorded faithfully, sent back to her in full detail. The overhead beam stayed where it was. The stone walls stayed where they were. The sand came up to meet her with the specific enthusiasm of a surface that had received this outcome before and had no opinion about receiving it again. She lay there for 2 seconds. This was not strategy. This was her nervous system conducting a rapid audit of its own status. The notebook had landed 3 feet to her left. The pen had gone further. The chest guard correctly oriented. Dustin's work had done what a correctly oriented chest guard does when the impact is from the side rather than the front, which was provide excellent protection to the area that had not been hit. Hazel got up. Not quickly, not gracefully. She got up the way a person gets up when getting up is the only available next step, and the body's preferences regarding timing have not been consulted. She retrieved the notebook. She did not retrieve the pen because the pen had gone somewhere, the overhead beam did not reach, and the audit was still running. She turned to face Qorath. He had stopped 8 meters away. The pale silver eyes were on her with the recalibrating attention of something that had produced this outcome before and was processing the variance of the outcome, not staying down. The geometric markings along his jaw and brow caught the overhead light. The midnight navy coat settled at his frame. The subsonic resonance dropped 1 register, not retreating, reassessing. Hazel's left side registered a formal complaint. She noted it and returned her attention to the pale silver eyes across the 8 meters of sand. "Right," she said, at normal conversational volume, to nobody in particular. On the observation deck, Professor Vaeln's formal narration document had received its last coherent entry approximately 30 seconds ago. The entry read, "Student made contact with arena floor, following initial engagement condition, ambulatory," and then there was a gap where the next entry should have been because the next thing that happened had not presented itself in formal language, and he had not wanted to wait for it. Beside him, Dustin had both hands flat on the transparent steel with the specific pressure of someone who had decided that the barrier was performing a necessary function and wanted to support its continued operation. His navy eyes were on the arena floor. His jaw was set. The scar through his left brow had not moved since Hazel went into the sand and had not relaxed since she got back out of it. "She's up," Dustin said. "Yes," Professor Vaeln said. "She got hit and she got up." "Yes. Nobody has gotten up before." The joint glow at Professor Vaeln's knuckles went from amber to white in one sharp pulse. His thin lips pressed together. On the vital sign monitors beside them, the amber numbers were doing something the scale had not previously been asked to display. Not the declining frequency of the previous draft of events, but a sharp, sustained elevation with a new secondary reading appearing in the lower register that the monitor's interface had generated a small alert icon for, which meant the system had recognized the reading as outside documented parameters and wanted someone to acknowledge that. Nobody acknowledged it. They were watching the arena. Hazel moved toward him. This was, again, the thing Dustin had told her not to do. It was also, structurally, the only available direction. The wall was behind her, the gate was to her left, and remaining stationary had already produced one result she didn't intend to repeat. She moved toward Qorath across the arena sand, and she did it with the particular commitment of someone who has decided that if the situation is going to resolve itself, it is going to do so in the forward direction. Qorath came to meet her. The second engagement was lower and faster than the first, the pale silver eyes dropping as he came, the geometric markings at his brow level with her eye line. By the time the distance closed, the 4-fingered hands forward, the pale jade caps at each broad fingertip catching the overhead beam. The subsonic resonance was at its elevated register felt in the sternum, in the back teeth, in the specific place behind the ears that the body reserves for information it considers urgent. Hazel went right this time. The step was faster than the first the audit had completed, and the results were informing current operations more efficiently. She went right, and Qorath's forward momentum carried him through, and she swung the notebook at the back of his shoulder as he passed with the flat-handed commitment of someone who had run out of considered options and was working with available materials. The notebook connected with the geometric markings along his upper shoulder blade. The result was immediate and entirely undocumented. Qorath stopped as if a cable had been cut. Not fell stopped, every motion arresting simultaneously, the midnight navy coat swinging forward past him with the momentum he no longer had. The pale silver eyes went very wide. The geometric markings at his shoulder where the notebook had landed, where Dustin had said the markings were sensory rather than structural, blazed a bright, involuntary jade green for exactly 2 seconds before returning to their standard depth. He turned. The pale silver eyes found Hazel across 3 meters of sand. Something in the resonance frequency shifted not down, not up, sideways, into a register the monitors had never previously recorded because the organism producing it had never previously encountered whatever had just happened to it. Hazel looked at the notebook in her hand. She looked at Qorath. She looked at the notebook again. She hit him again. Same location, flat-handed, notebook first, with the direct practical energy of someone identifying a result and attempting to replicate it. The geometric markings blazed jade green again. 2 seconds. The resonance shifted sideways again, further this time. "She's hitting him," Sale said from the observation deck. With her notebook, Dustin's hands were still flat on the transparent steel. "The markings," he said, in the voice of someone watching their own briefing notes, being applied incorrectly and working. "She hit the sensory markings. I told her about those. I said, don't?" I said the markings registered differently. "I didn't say hit them with a notebook." "And yet," Sale said, the electric blue branching lines at her temples were running their full accelerated rhythm. Her sensing digit discharged against the transparent steel. She watched the amber monitor numbers perform their sideways register behavior for the second time, with the expression of a person watching their entire academic framework reorganize around a data point it had not been designed to accommodate. Professor Vaeln had stopped writing. The formal narration document was open. The pen was in his long-fingered hand. The extra-jointed middle finger was glowing white at every joint. He was looking at the arena floor with the copper-gold eyes and the silver-gray sclera and the expression of a being who had taught combat theory for 23 years and was currently watching it be conducted with stationary. "The sensory concentration in the dorsal marking cluster," Dustin said rapidly to the transparent steel, "is highest at the shoulder blade junction. That's where she hit, both times. The impact on concentrated sensory tissue at that density would produce exactly." He stopped. He watched Hazel wind up for the third contact below. "She's going to do it again." "Yes," Sale said, with the notebook. "Yes." "That's not," Dustin started. "No," Sale agreed. The third hit was harder than the second because Hazel had her footing properly by the third, both boots, in the sand, the weight distributed correctly, the swing coming from the shoulder rather than the wrist. The notebook connected with the geometric markings at the shoulder blade junction with a flat, decisive sound that the arena acoustics returned to them clean and unambiguous. The jade green blaze lasted 4 seconds this time. 4 full seconds of the geometric markings across Qorath's entire upper back and shoulders, lighting in bright, involuntary jade, the pattern spreading from the impact point outward, along the marking lines to the jaw and brow. The backs of the 4-fingered hands before pulling back, in. The resonance frequency dropped completely out of its elevated register and went somewhere new. A deep, rolling pulse that was not the baseline and was not the engagement frequency. Something the monitor's alert icon appeared for a second time to flag. Qorath's knees hit the sand. Not fell, knelt. The distinction was structural. He went down in a controlled movement that was not a collapse and was not voluntary, and was the result of the sensory system in his dorsal marking cluster, receiving 3 concentrated impacts in 30 seconds and issuing an instruction that the rest of him was obliged to act on regardless of preference. The pale silver eyes were still open, still focused, still on Hazel, 3 meters away with the notebook in her hand, breathing with the quality of someone whose audit was running a follow-up report. The midnight navy coat settled around him on the sand. The silver embroidery caught the overhead beam. The geometric markings across his shoulders dimmed from jade green back through their standard depth, very slowly, like a light being turned down on a dial. The vital sign monitor showed the new reading holding. The alert icon had been joined by a second alert icon. Someone in the Academy's monitoring department was going to have an interesting shift. Hazel looked at Qorath on his knees in the sand. She looked at the notebook. She looked back at Qorath. She opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote something. Dustin came through the side access at a pace that the Academy's movement protocols had no category for, and crossed the arena sand to Hazel with the stride of a man who had been on the wrong side of a transparent steel barrier for the frand duration of an event, and was correcting that immediately. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her, the left side of the crimson jacket carrying the sand from the first impact, a reddening along the jaw from something during the second engagement, the dark auburn strands entirely free of the chignon by this point, the sharp green eyes clear and present, and conducting their usual assessment. He looked at the notebook. He looked at Qorath, on his knees in the sand with the pale silver eyes, tracking them both from their reduced elevation with the patient, recalibrating attention of something that had encountered a new data point and was incorporating it. He looked at the notebook again. "You hit him," Dustin said, "with your notebook." "The geometric markings," Hazel said. "You said they were sensory. I wrote it down." She showed him the notebook. In the margin of page 2, in her own handwriting, markings equals sensory, not structural impacts register differently. Below that, underlined, dorsal cluster, shoulder blade junction, highest concentration. Dustin looked at his own briefing, rendered in her handwriting, correctly recorded, correctly applied, deployed via stationary against a 10-foot Verlis, who was currently kneeling in arena sand for the first time in 11 years of documented observation. "I said don't move toward him," he said. "In the initial phase," Hazel said. "I moved toward him in the second and third phases, different phases." The scar through Dustin's left brow caught the overhead beam. His navy eyes stayed on the notebook for a long moment, on the margin note, on the underline, on the words dorsal cluster in handwriting that was entirely hers. He had told her that. She had written it in the right place. She had used it in the right place. He had stayed in his seat. Professor Vaeln arrived through the side access with the heel spur gait, each step precise, the emerald coat moving at the hem, the architectural collar framing the elongated skull, and crossed the sand to them. He stopped at Hazel's left. He looked at Qorath. He looked at the vital sign monitors through the transparisteel above. He looked at the formal narration document in his long-fingered hands, which contained, in its later entries, language that was increasingly less formal, and one entry that read simply, "She hit him again before the formal register had been recovered." He looked at Hazel. "You have generated," he said, with the care of a being selecting words that would have to exist in an academic record indefinitely, "the first complete Qorath assessment outcome in 11 years. "Does it replace the full practical grade?" Hazel asked. The joint glow at every visible point on Professor Vaeln's cobalt-violet skin pulsed once amber, warm, long, the glow of something that has arrived at the end of a very long professional wait and found the ending unrepeatable and completely unforeseeable and somehow entirely satisfactory. "It," he said, "replaces considerably more than that." Hazel nodded. She made a final note in the notebook. She capped her pen. She looked at Qorath, still on his knees in the sand with the pale silver eyes on her, and the geometric markings back to their standard depth, and the midnight navy coat settled around him in its silver embroidery, patient and present, and entirely unlike any previous assessment outcome. "Good," she said. "I'll need the new grading category in writing before the end of term."